Tell me a little bit about what you are expecting to be able to do through this podcast.
I was especially intrigued given your law enforcement background. I've talked to a lot of people over the course of the almost 6 years since Molly's murder. And I've engaged with a lot of members of law enforcement. And I would say that for the vast majority, it is a very positive experience. I have a very positive opinion of law enforcement. I would love to candidly be able to discuss with you those failures. Everyone says they're sorry, and of course they're sorry. I mean, that is the only thing really that anyone can say is that they're sorry. That's not going to get us anywhere. Like we're just going to stay sorry. I think we can move beyond sorry and openly look at a mistake is such a minor word for what they were, but those failures that happened and how they could have been avoided and how we can learn from them and how we have to learn from them. We can't keep doing things the way we've done them. There's not room for that anymore. There's nothing off the table. I'm comfortable with anything that you would want to ask.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this week for what I consider to be an extraordinary episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. My guest this week is Tracy Matheson, the mother of a daughter who was raped, then murdered. You would think that a mom who lost her daughter through rape and murder would have a hard time talking about it, especially when it didn't have to happen, when if everyone involved had done their jobs from a more educated and trauma-informed perspective, Molly Jane Matheson would probably be alive today. But talk about it, this mom does. And she talks about it in a perfect way. How do I mean that? Well, just listen for yourself. And listen well, because this episode is for those of you who've lost loved ones to murderers, those of you who've been raped or sexually assaulted, or know someone who has, and especially for those of you who respond to and investigate and who prosecute these types of cases. Because Tracy is talking to you, and she says it all just right. Here's Tracy. Tracy, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this podcast and to join me here today and talk about this tragedy, yet hopefully a success story in the end. It's really sad when a death has to occur to bring about change, but I do not want Molly's death to be in vain. And it's why I wanted you here. I want people to know about your project. Let's just start out, if you would, telling us a little bit about yourself and how the project got started.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the interest. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and consider myself a Texan, although wasn't born here, but I guess I can claim it. Married my high school sweetheart, and off we went to the University of Oklahoma, where we finished college, and then moved to the East Coast and spent a number of years from Virginia to Florida to Georgia, Connecticut, back to Florida, and then finally found our way back to Texas after about 25 years. We managed to add 4 kids to our family over the course of those years. We have a son, Nick, who is getting close to turning 32, which is crazy for me to say out loud. He's married and lives here in town. I have a son, Ben, who is 23, living at home and kind of figuring things out. I have a son, Max, who is 22 and in his senior year at Texas A&M University. Then I have a daughter, Molly, who should be about to turn 29. It is her rape and death in April of 2017 that was the unthinkable, unimaginable, more horrific devastation that any parent should ever possibly imagine that landed in our lives, and what set me on this path that I wish to goodness I wasn't on. But once I kind of came to terms with the failures that were exposed as the investigation process unfolded, and it was identified that the person who ultimately was held responsible for Molly's rape and murder was someone who law enforcement in the state of Texas knew. They had investigated him. They had his DNA. They had talked to him on multiple occasions for raping and strangling women, and no one had done anything. And so that is ultimately kind of combined. All of that was like, I have to start a nonprofit, having no idea what that even meant. But that's what I had to do, was start a nonprofit.
Let's go ahead and have you talk about that nonprofit. The name and where the name came from is significant and amazing, and I love it. So let's tell the audience about that and where it went after you made this decision to start the project.
The nonprofit is named Project Beloved, the Molly Jane Mission. Project Beloved is significant due to what I call the beloved story. When I found Molly's body in the shower of her apartment, I discovered her deceased body after her boss had called me to say she had not shown up for work. As I'm looking at her body on the floor of her shower, I am registering the fact that there is a tattoo on her hip and it says Beloved. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know she had a tattoo. I am not anti-tattoo. I took my son to get a tattoo. However, Molly had not shared that she had gotten a tattoo. And I can recall in the immediate aftermath of my very worst nightmare thinking, this is crazy. This is her dead body. And there's this word that I happen to think is a really beautiful word and have thought it's a beautiful word for a very long time. And so I contacted a friend of hers who I figured probably would know because, young women tell their friends things that they might not tell their parents. Amber told me that, yes, Molly had that tattoo. She also had others, but she said that tattoo was most important to Molly. And so I asked why. And she said, well, because she knew she was beloved in God's eyes. That sentence brought tremendous comfort to me at a time that I so desperately needed it, to know that my daughter thought that so significantly that she would tattoo it on her body. So a week after Molly's murder was Easter Sunday, and a friend that lives here in Fort Worth, who has known Molly since she was 3, she texted me to say, Tracy, as I sat in church, there are words that came to me as I thought about Molly, and they were, be loved, beloved. And Michelle knew nothing about the tattoo. And I thought that's very odd that this word is coming back to me, but I received it as a hug from God and, just sort of this great comfort. The couple weeks after her death, our house was flooded with all kinds of people who came and visited and came to chat and bring food and drink and gifts and you name it. They were just there to support us. And one friend in particular brought me a bracelet that had Molly's name stamped on it. I have it on right here. But of course, I love the bracelet. It has Molly's name on it, and I haven't taken it off. My friend owned this company that made the bracelet. And so as we're thinking about this, I've got to start a nonprofit, I'm realizing I'm going to need money. I didn't know what I would need money for, but I figured I would need money for something. And so I thought, well, I'll ask Martha if we could maybe make bracelets and we would stamp Beloved on them and we could sell them and make some money. So Martha and I went to lunch and I'm planning to ask her. And so I'm telling her the story and I've told her what I've just told you. And she stops me before I get to the ask. And she said, Tracy, do you know what that bracelet that I gave you, do you know what it's called on our website? I had no idea. She said, the Beloved Bangle. It's like, okay, that is absolutely crazy that once again, this word that was there in my darkest moment has resurfaced again and again and again. As I faced the days and the moments and the weeks after Molly's murder, I was haunted by, was she afraid? Did she feel alone? What was she experiencing? I mean, my mind, it was a really horrible place to go in my mind. I equate it to like a neon sign from God saying, she was not alone. I was with her. She is with me. And you do not have to be fearful of that. That sort of helped to calm that fear that I had, that Molly knew that her father, her God, her Jesus was there with her. When it was time to name the nonprofit, I gave the person who had stepped forward to assist in that in a way that I certainly would not have been able to. Gave her the story, just thinking, maybe it'd be cool to weave it into the name somehow. And so Project Beloved is what we settled on. It really is sort of our guiding principle of everything that we do. I mean, everything has to feel authentic to Molly, but there is this belovedness woven in to who we are and what we try to do for others, I guess.
Thank you for sharing that. That is a beautiful story and very inspired with the name and everything that happened. I'm loving that. And I have to tell you, the story begs the question in my mind, how do I get one of those bracelets?
We had them on the website and then we ran into some manufacturing problems, and it was not my friend's company. I was having them made in a different way. My friend sold the company and they weren't holding up. That has been on my list for a long time to find another way to offer a beloved bangle. When it is available, we will be publicizing it everywhere so that, people really resonate. It resonated with them. And I love that they wanted to wear the bracelet and think of Molly and remember that they are also beloved. So.
Okay. So now I'll be waiting with bated breath for that announcement, as will probably 100% of my listening audience. So
awesome.
You'll have a great initial sales launch.
There we go.
I'm
That's
sure.
Good.
Tracy, I love the way you talk about Molly, and I would love to celebrate her life through this time that I get to spend with you. But I also have some hard questions. And let's save the celebration part for the end, if that's okay.
That's
I
good.
would love to end on a really happy, positive note.
That sounds good. Absolutely.
Great. I do have to ask, since this podcast is trauma-informed based, and we deal in the realm of sexual assault and rape and interpersonal violence with trauma, I'm just curious, and I think our audience would be interested in knowing how you are surviving this trauma and what you do for yourself to find that survival path every day.
I can say that trauma is real. Trauma manifests in tangible, physical ways that I don't know that I actually realized until I walked this journey. Just recognizing how I would be having a conversation with someone early on and I would find myself shivering, not feeling necessarily that this is difficult for me to talk about, but my body was registering this is difficult. My scatterbrained brain, which to this day, my brain is not the same as it was before April of 2017. I find it very challenging to stay on task and to complete tasks. I'm not sure if it will ever be the same. I read a lot of books. If it had to do with the death of a child, dealing with hard things and your faith and so on, I was like a sponge reading, and I'm not a reader. I couldn't read enough books early on. One of the early things that I started doing was finding gratitude, whether it was, oh my gosh, that was a good cup of coffee. And sometimes that would be about as much as I could come up with for the day was, I had a good cup of coffee and I'm grateful for that. And looking for those moments, like intentionally, and naming them to myself out loud in my head. I found that to be really helpful. I also read early on, there was a saying, lean into the suck. It's not very poetic, but this sucks in the worst kind of way. And trauma does that to people, and trying to avoid it isn't going to work. And so when things are feeling especially bad, especially sucky, I just sort of acknowledge it and allow myself to feel that way and know that I'm not going to stay there. I'll get back to a moment of gratitude. And I think more than anything, absolutely, the greatest source of my dealing with it all has been my faith. God has become real to me in a way that he never has been real before. And I've had a relationship with him for a very long time, but it was at a very surface level because my life was pretty okay. We had some bumps along the way, but from the outside looking in, most people would say, that Matheson family, things are okay for them, And I always tried to be transparent and not paint too rosy of a picture because, life is hard no matter how you slice it. Who thinks that they're going to have this kind of hard land in their lives? Nobody does. And so thank goodness I did have the faith that I had when all of this happened. And he just has shown up in ways, unexplainable ways that make no sense, and given me a strength and a courage that I didn't know that I have. Basically, has said, I am not going to waste this pain. There is going to be a purpose to it. We are going to find a way to bring light to the darkness, to help bring change. Molly's life is, while it here on earth it has ended, her story is going to be a catalyst to help others to recognize her death didn't have to happen and it could have been avoided had we done better. And so now it's time to do better. That's kind of what gives me the courage every day to wake up and say, okay, let's get to work. What can we do?
That's amazing and good words to dwell on. I'm so thankful that you have that attitude, because we wouldn't be sitting here talking if you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I know that. It's almost unimaginable to me to think about what you felt. The trauma of losing a child is one thing. And I know that's a lot of what you were talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a secondary deep trauma in knowing that it didn't have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that for us about what happened that shouldn't have happened and what didn't happen that should have happened?
Yeah. For so long, I kind of have not talked about it in great detail in any sort of a public way because we were awaiting the criminal trial. And so I didn't want to say anything that might jeopardize things. However, we got resolution almost a year ago now, when the defendant pled guilty, and in exchange for a sentence of life with no parole and no appeals. But he also pled guilty to a second capital murder. He killed Megan Gettram 5 days after Molly. And he also pled guilty to 4 additional sexual assaults that had been filed after Molly and Megan were murdered. Sexual assaults that dated back all the way to 2012. People say, oh, now you have closure. Well, I don't think there's any such thing as closure. Yes, he is in prison, and I don't have to take a deep breath every time I drive to downtown Fort Worth, knowing that he's in the building where the jail is housed. I don't give that a second thought, and I really don't give him a second thought anymore. There is resolution, there is an ending to that, but in essence, now that we're on the other side of it, it has opened the door to what happened starting back in 2012, and given me opportunity to now be able to speak openly and candidly and honestly about those failures. In 2012, this same defendant raped and strangled an 18-year-old girl in Plano, Texas. And she went home. She told her parents. They took her to the hospital. She had a forensic medical exam. Photographs were taken, and also photographs which documented marks on her neck from being strangled. She reported her assault to the Plano Police Department and started that process of working with the detective. I have reviewed the case file backwards and forwards more times than I can tell you. I've watched every video of the interviews of her and of the defendant. And the really short summary is the detective did not believe her. He did not find her credible. He found the defendant credible, who showed up when he was asked and didn't ask questions. And he was very compliant and respectful. And he was a good defendant. She was a traumatized 18-year-old woman who knew she was dealing with someone who didn't believe her, someone in a position of authority, someone, a male. The dynamics, were very heavily at play, where she's like, everything she would say, he would receive in a different way. It got to the point where it was clearly more traumatic for her to continue down this path than it was to not. And so she said, I can't do it anymore. The case remained open, but in essence, it was done. Off she went to try to live her life at college. There was a case in 2014 in Allen, Texas. A victim was at a party, was left for dead outside in the cold. It was January. Her body was found at some crazy hour, and she was taken to the hospital. The emergency room doctor had some suspicions about things and asked that this victim have a forensic medical exam. There was a short list of people who had been at the party, so those people were questioned. The same defendant was on that short list. He was brought in to be questioned. He said, yes, he was there. Yes, he had heard about what had happened to this victim. He didn't touch her. He didn't have anything to do with it. You can have my DNA. That's how confident he was that he had nothing to do with it. So they took his DNA. Her rape kit was sent off to the lab. It took a full year for the lab to come back and say there was DNA in it. So this is where we get a little bit of the backlog involved in our story. So the lab a year later tells Allen PD that, yeah, there was some DNA in it. So then I'm not the expert, but I think then confirmation test was done. Could it have been this person's DNA? And I'm guessing they must have submitted other people's DNA for the lab to then compare it to. And that took an additional 2 years for the lab to come back and say, oh, the DNA in the rape kit belonged to the suspect who said he didn't touch her. Same suspect involved in the Plano case. Allen PD was alerted to this information 41 days before Molly was killed. So for 41 days, they sat on this information and did nothing. And Molly was killed 41 days later. Then in 2014, in March, it was spring break, and there was a young woman, 20 years old, had gone to South Padre to do what 20-year-olds do at spring break, and that's go have a whole bunch of fun. And she met the defendant. Kids socialized. She met him. They talked with one another, hung out, whatever. He follows her into the bathroom one evening, rapes her and strangles her. There's video footage of her fleeing the bathroom, obviously in distress. She goes and finds a security person, reports it right away. Detectives come. Her initial response was, I just want to go home, because this was horribly upsetting. And the detective said to her, but don't you want to make sure he doesn't do it to someone else? Katie responded, no, you're right. I want to make sure that doesn't happen. And it's so interesting because I am in touch with Melissa from Plano and Katie from South Padre. Katie has said to me so many times, Tracy, my detective believed me. I really think my detective believed me. There's a certain comfort for her to know that he believed her. And so they do their investigation. They question the defendant. He says, yeah, they had sex. It was consensual. They collect his DNA on the spot, knowing that he very likely is there for the weekend or whatever and is going to disappear, and who knows if they'll find him again. They go to the district attorney with the case that they have worked, and the DA won't prosecute. And no one has said this to me out loud, but my suspicion is that there was also video footage of Katie kissing this suspect prior to him following her into the bathroom and raping and strangling her. And so either the viewpoint is, well, she was asking for it, she deserved it, or I don't have the fight in me to try to convince a jury that what happened in the stairwell does not then translate to what happened in the bathroom. Eventually, there's a CODIS hit returned that linked the South Padre case to the Plano case. So now we've got those two agencies in touch with one another and aware of the fact that they both have cases where the victim has reported raping, strangulation, the same position. I mean, the details are so completely identical that it's kind of incredible. The detective in Plano goes to his legal team, who advise that the details of the South Padre case do not impact their 2012 Plano case. However, it is possible that their case could be helpful to South Padre, and to share the case file with South Padre if they need it. And also, don't contact the victim to tell her about this unless South Padre says they're going to. So Plano maintains their flawed viewpoint that he has a lying victim in light of the fact that there's another victim reporting exactly the same thing. South Padre goes back to the DA with the CODIS hit, which to me, I'm not law enforcement and I'm not a prosecutor, but to me, that's like, here's a silver platter.
Absolutely.
I can't give you anything more. And again, decline prosecution. And so, what could have been done differently? Well, you could, one, start by believing, and, I hear the naysayers, oh my gosh, that means blindly believing victims and blah, blah. I want to punch a wall when I hear that. That is not what that is, but it is everything when someone has endured the trauma of a sexual assault to sit next to someone and tell their story and recognize that the person who's receiving it is starting from a place of compassion and understanding and support, and that they are there to help you navigate this path and to get the details from you, details that may not be readily available because of the trauma. It makes all the difference in the world. I heard it once said that we will know that we are doing it right when a victim comes forward to report a sexual assault and they do not experience more trauma than the sexual assault itself. I mean, that's the world that I long for because when you report other crimes, you don't ever second guess. Should I report that my purse was stolen out of my car? Should I report that my house was robbed? Should I report? You don't ever question that. Of course you report it. But those who experience sexual assault second guess from the get-go, I would almost say every single time. Is it going to be worth it for me to speak up? Do I have the strength to endure the finger pointing and the blaming and the shaming and the questioning and the doubting that and I don't mean just the system, because I think we as a community at large, we've kind of been programmed that that's the way we react to sexual violence, because we kind of elevate that credibility of the accused. That's sort of our default place to go. Well, he's such a nice guy. He would never do that. He's from a good family. He's never treated me that way. Really nice people are perpetrating terrible crimes, and we've got to kind of shift our mind and imagine that really nice people are also capable of doing really horrible things.
You've touched on about 4 different areas that we could spend about 24 hours on in each area. There is so much in what you're saying. One of the things that I want to address right off is what you're just talking about, the fact that we live in a rape society. I think you just hit the nail on the head describing those cultural and societal belief systems that for some reason, dating back millennia, that rape victims aren't credible. Rape victims aren't to be believed. Rape victims make things up for whatever reason. And I have been training and teaching just the opposite, and it's still a problem. And I think where it hurts the most for me in listening to you talk is having been a former law enforcement investigator who investigated these cases. I don't like disparaging my former profession, but the truth of the matter is, while law enforcement is applying their best efforts, the problem is that they're applying best efforts to a belief system that they inherited long before they became law enforcement officers and investigators. And they're carrying that over into their profession and not taking the time to get better educated on what the dynamics are for rapists, perpetrator mentality. But they're also severely lacking in the victimology and the victim impact and the neurology of trauma. Are you able to help us understand how you manage the anger of all the tragedy and failures that were made by law enforcement and prosecutors?
Yeah, there is a lot of anger, and I think probably it's best that I haven't gone there in any sort of a public manner. I've fantasized all kinds of things of public shaming and blame, you name it. I've had fantasies of that. I guess my response, or the way that I've tried to deal with the anger, is okay, so this didn't have to happen. This doesn't have to happen again. So what can we do to put things in line, to put things in place to ensure that it doesn't? And so that's what we've kind of done with Project Beloved, is how can we solve these problems? And I have my own ideas about specific individuals who were involved in this story. And I realized that I don't have any control over them. So I'm like, okay, so I need law enforcement to hear me and really understand what it is that I'm talking about. I'm not just a mad mom. It's so much more than that. I think I'm a very righteously angry mom, and I am not needlessly pointing fingers because my daughter's dead. I have credible evidence that supports my anger. And with Project Beloved, we decided, okay, well, we learned about a trauma-informed response. And I'm like, well, I don't have the expertise to teach people about that. I don't have the background, but I learned about a soft interview room and how that is a component, a piece of a trauma-informed response. And so I thought, well, I bet there isn't an agency in the country who has a budget set aside for a soft interview room. And a soft interview room is basically taking your existing cold, stark, and sterile interview space, which I can say with authority is what the vast majority of interview spaces look like in law enforcement agencies, taking it and giving it a facelift, like a makeover, and putting comfortable furniture in there and better lighting and pretty colors and decorative items, and making it look nothing like law enforcement and more like someone's living room. This is okay, this didn't have to happen, so I'm going to ask you, please do this instead. And it can't just be have a soft interview room. It has to be, please buy into what it means to be trauma informed. And that has to become part of the DNA of how you conduct your investigations. And it can't be, I attended a training, I'm done, check a box. It has to be woven into your brain that you can't look at anything related to sexual violence in any other way except through this trauma-informed lens. And if you can do that and then add the softer interview room into the puzzle, well, then you are positioned in the very best way to be able to have that very difficult conversation with someone who doesn't want to talk to you, and make them feel comfortable enough that they can pull details from the far places in their brain and help you to build a case that the district attorney's office will take. And then the district attorney's office is well-versed in trauma and understands the dynamics of sexual violence and understands how we like to blame victims instead of perpetrators. And so they're well-positioned to pick a jury and educate that jury on, she wasn't asking for it, she didn't deserve it, he's the one who is at fault. He's the one where our anger should be pointed. And I'm using the pronouns that are typically associated. I fully acknowledge that women are also capable of sexual violence, but little disclaimer there. And then we have juries who have been exposed to, maybe the way I've been thinking about this all along, and maybe my default of believing the suspect over the woman who has risked everything to come forward and speak their truth, maybe I need to reevaluate that. And all of a sudden, we're going to see this shift. We're not going to stop sexual violence. I think that's naive thinking. But we can create a world where those who perpetrate these kinds of crimes do so knowing they're going to be held accountable. And they will go to prison. We won't tolerate it anymore. And then those who do report it are going to be able to get on that path of healing, knowing that they have been supported by all of those that they've encountered, whether it's their neighbor that they disclosed to, or their boss, or their teacher, or their parent, or their best friend, or whomever. And then the system that they engage with is supportive all along. Does it end in a guilty verdict every time? Probably not. But was the experience one where you felt supported and believed and just held up and, fought for? Yes. Okay. Well, so it was worth the fight then.
All of what you're saying is so powerful and meaningful and important, and is exactly in line with what I'm really trying to get across through this podcast. Tracy, your presence here has lended very strongly to that goal. It's all about bringing justice to victims. It's all about starting by believing. It's about being trauma informed. It's about recognizing that we have gone way too long in this rape culture of believing perpetrators instead of victims. And we need to be a culture of starting by believing.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about Molly Jane's Law?
Absolutely. Do.
I'm really bad about promoting that, but I think I need to speak up about it more.
Well, I saw it on your website and read a little bit about it, but yes, please explain it to us and tell us what's going on.
In 2019, I had gone to our local representative and told him we needed to write a law. He listened and he said, okay. And so we came up with what was House Bill 3106, what we were proposing, and it was passed by the Texas legislature and signed by the governor in the state of Texas. And what it does is it says that law enforcement shall use VICAP. And VICAP is a violent criminal apprehension program, which is run and administered by the FBI. It was created to identify serial murderers and serial rapists, and it's available in all 50 states. It is free to use. It is underutilized. But what it allows law enforcement agencies to communicate with one another. Most people think that that's what happens naturally, and it does not. if you are investigating a case in this jurisdiction, you put it into VICAP, then when this jurisdiction gets a case, and they can go to VICAP and they can search for certain things about the case. Maybe it's a specific weapon, maybe it was a specific act, maybe it was a certain piece of clothing, whatever detail it is. It can be a lot of details, it can be very few details, but you can search VICAP and you can see, oh my gosh, I'm in Dallas, but Tyler, Texas has a case of exactly the same. And or you can search the offender's name, and all of a sudden you can see that, oh wow, because so oftentimes those who rape are serial rapists. So every time that we get a report of sexual assault, it should be looked at as, I could be solving a serial rape case. That's where the statistics show us that you're not just solving a case, you could be solving a whole bunch of cases. And VICAP just allows people to connect dots and communicate with one another and know that beyond what they know in their jurisdiction. And so all Molly Jane's Law does is says you have to use VICAP. We're the first state in the country to mandate its usage. I hope we're not the last. I've heard other states are considering it. I think about the powerful tool that it has the capacity to be if we're putting data into it. If we're not, then it's just sort of this empty cavity. But if everyone's putting data into it, then imagine, because rapists don't stay in one place and they cross state lines and all of that. And so imagine if we're all populating it with these cases, we're going to make significant process. One, we're going to save someone from being raped. And two, we're going to save someone from knowing what I know. And that is having someone murdered, someone that they love, because their pattern escalated. And in the case of our murdering rapist, he was telling people, I'm going to kill someone, because he was strangling and raping them. And that is a powerful indicator for, I will kill someone eventually if you let me. And in essence, that's what the system did. They let him continue to practice until he did, and he killed 2 women. That's Molly Jane's Law. And I'm super proud that we accomplished it. There's more work to be done. I've got my eyes on something else this session, so we'll see.
Great. Glad to hear that. I'll be anxious to see what comes up. I'm going to mention that again for my listeners who are, of course, in every state in this country. It's Texas House Bill HB 3106, so that they can look that up. And if you're in law enforcement or prosecution or some sort of legislature in your state, check that out. The wording is there. Texas passed it, so other states could too now. I mean, you've set a precedent. And
there's no money. There's no, you don't need any sort of fiscal,
additional monies to enact the law.
Just use it. Yeah.
And VICAP is powerful. I remember VICAP when I was in investigations, and you're right, underutilized. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Tell our audience, besides soft interview rooms, what other projects do you invest in and promote and try to accomplish?
Our main one is we call Beloved Bundles, and it's a string backpack, and it has clothing and undergarments and a hygiene kit. I learned about when victims go for their forensic medical exam or their rape kit, that oftentimes law enforcement would like to have their clothing as evidence, but maybe there's nothing for the victim to change into, so they miss evidence, or they're given a pair of hospital scrubs to wear home, and that seems kind of insulting. So we partner with rape crisis centers and hospitals all over the country. We find volunteers in the local community. We send everything, all items are brand new, to the volunteer. They have basically a packing party, and they assemble the bundles, one of this, one of this, one of this, one of this, and they're sized for females and for males. We also do them for pediatric victims. And then once they're assembled, then they take them to whatever agency it is that has said that they could use the bundle. And so then after an exam, someone can take a shower, they can brush their teeth, they can wash their hair, they can put on a clean set of clothing, and they can walk out of the hospital with dignity. We really are all over the country. We've donated about 13,000 Beloved Bundles since we did our first donation in 2018. And then the soft interview rooms, again, law enforcement agencies hear about us one way or another. I do not solicit a soft interview room. I don't go to them and ask. I want them to come to me and ask. I say yes. We have a wait list. It's a lengthy wait list, and we've doubled our capacity to do rooms in 2023. We've done 66 soft interview rooms or so. That number varies because sometimes an agency has the funds to do the furnishings, but we'll kind of give them some extra pieces. So we kind of count them. They're all over the country. We've done them for large agencies, Houston Police Department and Dallas Police Department, and we're going to go to Detroit here in the fall. We've done them for the Department of Homeland Security. We've done an Air Force base here in Texas. I'm going to Fayetteville, Arkansas next week to do a room for the FBI. You know, it thrills me to see the concept spreading and, you know, is considered a best practice. And I hope that there will be a day where that's all that we do. And the concept applies to anyone who has experienced trauma, to have them sit in a space that looks warm and inviting versus what is portrayed on television.
Yeah, I have personal experience with soft interview rooms and love them and know their importance and really appreciate what you're doing for law enforcement and other agencies that are asking for these rooms, because they are so important.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, we could go on and on about all of these topics. There's so much that you've said that is powerful, and I would love to delve into even deeper. But I do want to dedicate some time to really celebrating Molly. I think we are remiss if we take the sadness of a death and try and ignore the grief, because grief is love, and we need to recognize Molly for who she was. And so please take some time and tell us about the beautiful Molly.
She was one of four kids, but the only girl. And so she was fairly certain that gave her extra special status in the family, and was forever reminding everyone, mostly her brothers, that she was the favorite child. There's a note down on the chalkboard that hangs in my kitchen that is still there in her handwriting that says, "Molly is my favorite child, Dad." And if she met you, she would say, "Hey, Dave, did you know I'm the favorite?" She took great pleasure in reminding everyone of that. That is not true. However, you know, we humored her and let her think that. She was someone who was an old soul from an early age, wise beyond her years. Friends would come to her with, you know, pretty serious needs and issues, and they would seek Molly's counsel. She was available to listen and to offer support and help, however that might be. And if it meant you needed to run to Taco Bell at 2 a.m. to get a taco, well, then she was up for it, you know. Or did you need her to drive you to the airport? Okay, I can do that. You know, Molly she really took the gift of friendship very seriously, valued her friends tremendously, was a sister like no other, cheering her brothers on at all of their various events, providing all the girl advice that they did not want. Her brother, he wanted to dress up as the Joker for Halloween one year, and we went to the costume store and bought special makeup so that she could do his makeup. I mean, he looked as good as the Hollywood version when she was done with him. She was light, and I knew that in the moment. I recognized that I have a really unique relationship with my daughter. We really liked each other. We moved to Texas when she was a sophomore in high school, which is a hard time for anyone to move, I think, especially for a young woman. So we're both starting over, in essence, in a place where neither of us really knew anyone. And so that kind of forced us into this closer bond of hanging out together and spending time together and so on. And I knew that this is unusual, because I would watch other people have difficult relationships with their daughters. And and it wasn't always rosy. There was a time where she was difficult and challenging, and she was sure I didn't know anything, and made sure I knew she didn't think I knew anything. And I would call her father. We'd be on some trip, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm ready to just put her on a plane and send her home because she is being so challenging. But she kind of came through that, and we really enjoyed one another's company. I think the greatest gift that Molly brought to the world was her sense of humor. She was funny without trying. She could make anyone laugh. If she thought you were having a bad day, then she was going to find a way to make you laugh. The night before she died, she was at our house having dinner, and we were sitting around just chatting, you know, like we would normally. And she and her dad is a very funny man, and the two of them fed off of one another. And it was almost like a contest of like, I'm going to be, without them really intentionally trying. And I was often the brunt of their jokes, but that's okay. I can take it. But there was something that had probably been on social media about the dad sending the daughter into the auto parts store to ask for, I can't remember what it was, but it's asking for something for the car that you don't replace. Like, I need more air conditioning for my air conditioner or something like that. And I don't remember what it was, but they were cracking one another up about it. And they were sure they were going to be able to convince her older brother, Nick, to do it. And it was going to be hysterical. So that's one of my fond memories of our last night with her. Her Twitter account has become a great source of laughter for us, as she has, she tweeted, I think it may be my professor's first time teaching, and it may also be his first time using a computer. Or she says, the bouncer at the bar said my eyebrows are on fleek, and I almost cried. And I'm like, I don't even know what on fleek means, but I think it's a compliment. But she was not, her friends, as I have heard from them over the years, the recurring theme over and over and over again. One, yes, she was such an outstanding friend, but two, she was so funny. That was what she thought the world needed to laugh, we needed more joy and more light. And so as we do things through Project Beloved, we really do want it to feel like what Molly would have wanted. Molly was someone who was always rooting for the underdog. She just had a heart for those who needed someone to be on their side. And she was planning to be a social worker and had kind of identified troubled youth as the area she would like to work. She had a really amazing ability to connect with young people. She was often requested to babysit. All the neighbor kids loved having her babysit. So she was going to be really good at that. And so I know that fighting for those who experience sexual assault and sexual violence, that is something that Molly wholeheartedly and 100% believed in. And she really took great insult at the way a lot of the big name cases that were in the news before she died. She was very offended by those cases, recognized that this is not the way that it should be. In essence, doing this work is exactly what Molly would have wanted us to do. She wouldn't want us to dwell in our sadness. She would accept that we are sad, but then she would want us to find a way to step forward and take the sadness and channel it in a direction to impact change so that it doesn't have to happen like this.
I love all of that. And I do celebrate her with you. I didn't know her, obviously, but wow. What an amazing person. What brought Molly the most joy?
I would say her family. Yeah, just family, friends. That was a source of tremendous joy for her. She was also a huge fan of driving in the car and singing to the radio really loud, and so I've got some great videos from road trips that we would take that, thank goodness, it was in the age of having a cell phone that, I could do that and take a video of her singing, dancing, singing, driving all at once. And it makes me smile today.
I love that. Tracy, this has been a real pleasure and an honor for me to be able to speak with you and to get out to our audience the story about Molly and all of the things that need to occur and that are occurring, the great things that are coming out of honoring Molly and her tragic death, not letting her death be in vain. Thank you for all of that.
Thank you.
I am definitely going to post the Project Beloved website in the notes of this episode. Is there any other way that I can help promote Project Beloved?
But, our website, I think, does a decent job of telling our story and kind of explaining the work that we're doing. There's a news tab that has all the various news articles that have been published through the years, wherever we're doing work, and whatever news agency has decided that this was worth writing a story about, well, then we've got it linked there. We're on social media, Facebook and Instagram mostly. That's kind of how we keep people informed, and we welcome everyone becoming part of this. Our whole thing is, we want to change the conversation about sexual assault. We don't talk about it, but we need to talk about it. It impacts so many people, and we need to make it okay to talk about. And when we do that better, well, then more people are going to feel comfortable coming forward and telling their story.
That's true. And like I say in every podcast and every podcast notes, start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. So thank you for bringing that to light even more. I want to do this again. I would love to collaborate with you and promote you and do all I can to help Project Beloved, and check in with you again in 6-8 months or something, and see how things are going and where you're at and what's happening. I would love that.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to give a very heartfelt thank you to Tracy Matheson for having the strength, internal fortitude, and courage to talk to us about Molly. This story is both heartbreaking and inspiring, and my hope for this episode is that it helps ensure that Molly's death is not in vain, that her legacy and her example live on to bring all surviving family members of those who've had loved ones who've been raped, then murdered, a ray of courage and hope. Thank you also, Tracy, for your sacrifice and hard work in keeping Molly's legacy alive through Project Beloved. I encourage all of my listeners to check out the Project Beloved website and to contribute to the project if you can. You'll be helping to bring justice to victims of rape and sexual assault. The website address is included in the episode notes. I also want to thank you, my listeners, for your strength in tuning into Sexual Assault Survivor Stories each week. I hope you're learning and experiencing new ways to help yourself on your journey to surviving and thriving. Please share this episode with everyone you know, and please check the follow or subscribe button on this podcast. It helps the podcast grow and helps bring justice to victims and survivors. Finally, remember to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.